Right. All right, good morning. Can you hear me at the back? Okay, great, thank you. Welcome to the 2024 Michael Wolff Lecture. For those of you joining us for the first time, and we're delighted to have a good number of you here, this is our conference's keynote event, at which we honor one of the pioneering figures in Victorian studies, both the journal and the field, and invite one of its leading scholars to share their work with us. Today, it's my great pleasure to introduce Richard Menke, Professor of English at the University of Georgia. Richard's education, I feel, destined him to be a Victorianist. At Rice University, he met and was taught by the great Bob Patton. He then went on to do his PhD at Stanford, where, in addition to Rob Polhemus, who directed his dissertation, he was guided by a wide range of distinguished 19th century scholars, Barbara Gelpi, Joss Marsh, J. Hillis Miller, and Hilary Shaw among them. After graduating in 2000, he moved across the country to Georgia and joined the department in Athens, where he has moved through the ranks and currently serves as both professor and associate head. In 2008, he brought out Telegraphic Realism, Victorian Fiction and Other Information Systems with Stanford University Press. In the words of the Victorian Studies reviewer, this was a compelling account of the complex and diverse ways Victorian novelists engaged with the new means of communication and a world in which, as Henry James memorably claimed, relations stop nowhere. Exploring information and communication systems from the postal service to wireless radio telegraphy, and appearing the year after the first iPhone joined our lives, the book defined an interest in the interrelationship between new media technologies and the evolution of forms of realism, which has been central to all Richard's work. That interest would continue in his second book, Literature, Print, Culture, and Media Technologies, 1880 to 1900, Many Inventions, which Cambridge published in 2019. In this study, he examines the beginnings of media technology and the late 19th century transition away from machines as mere passive holders or inscribers of information and towards their more dynamic role and ever-growing presence as networks through which information flowed. Richard delves broadly and deeply into the impact of these new media on late Victorian fiction, ranging from a discussion of Titbits, an earlier version of which appeared in our own VPR, to a brilliant reading of the ways in which Dracula was constructed through media transcriptions. With the appearance of this book, he was, in the words of the Critical Inquiry reviewer, confirmed as the leading authority on the relations of 19th century literature and media technologies. And he followed this book up in 2022 with an edited collection from Routledge, Victorian Material Culture, Inventions, and Technological Things. Today, he continues to work on the ecologies of media in late Victorian writing, as well as in a new area of focus, imperial variations on 19th century British fictions. Although this is a research lecture, I would feel remiss if I didn't also speak to Richard's dedication to students and student learning. Before becoming associate head of his department, he served as its undergraduate coordinator, and he's twice won university-wide teaching awards. RSVP, of course, has a long history of supporting teaching as well as research, and it seems especially fitting to have a Wolff lecturer who so ably combines the two. So please join me then in welcoming Richard Menke to deliver the 2024.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. We had a little bit of pre-talk microphone issues, and so I may need to try a number of different strategies. The lapel mic ran out of juice, so please, I hope that the people in the back will let me know if at any point you can't hear me, we need to switch to a different mic. Just don't let me know during one of my jokes, right? I work so hard to get them in here. Anyway, so I'm very grateful to be here to give the Wolff lecture. I want to offer my thanks to RSVP, the conference organizers, the program committee for inviting me to speak, and for this inspiring and very convivial conference. Some of the images from the Cayley will stay with me forever. So in this talk, I want to consider how 19th century periodicals become places where print culture understands new technologies, and how this encounter produces distinctive senses of techno-modernity that are in important ways modeled on serial print itself. For several decades now, I've argued for reading 19th century print media in their wonderful variety of genres, registers, writers, audiences, alongside the era's new media innovations, from electric telegraphy and photography to the typewriter, telephone, phonograph, radio, early cinema, so on. Now, these are many of the media technologies that, like print itself, remain important throughout the 20th century and beyond it. Even those that are no longer part of our own media environment have left an imprint that is still readily visible in contemporary media. But despite my title, this talk is perhaps less about place than it is about time. So I'm sorry if I lured you here under false pretenses. I want to examine some of the ways in which Victorian periodicals came to represent technological development and innovation, and ultimately how periodicals help triangulate or to mediate the relationship between technology and modernity in the 19th century. So my terms themselves may need a little explanation or apology. I talk about media both to emphasize their dynamics as far more than conduits for content, something that none of us here need to be convinced of, but also to highlight the affinities and divergences between the range of print and non-print communication forms. The word technology is basically an anachronism, since it remained uncommon in English for most of the century, and in any case meant systematic knowledge about the mechanical arts or applied sciences, or maybe a treatise on those subjects, not like a technology. Even so, a focus on a periodical print media in the 19th century already takes us into the ambit of technology and invention, since periodicals or their proprietors were often early adopters of the era's innovations in printing and publishing. And so at this conference I already had the chance to play with Kelsey's wonderful toys, the printing press here at the Pamphlet Press, and a great panel yesterday that considered the representation of new technologies in print. Okay, so I think this is just my favorite slide. I'm not actually going to talk about incidents in connection with tidbits. Okay. So, and then there's modernity, my other term, a suspiciously or usefully vague one, but at its core, it describes relationship to time. One aspect of this relationship, a putative break from the past and tradition, perhaps most often receives attention, but we could also think of the larger idea of a state of permanent change that becomes bound up not only with history, but also with society, knowledge, science, economics, and so on. The relationship of modernity to print is perhaps most deftly summed up in Elizabeth Eisenstein's idea of a permanent renaissance, thanks to the radically increased ease, not only of disseminating texts, but also of storing and retrieving them. And that will be crucial to my talk. This encourages a sense of knowledge itself as a permanent growing accumulation. Today, I'll be interested in how periodicals participate in these senses of cumulative knowledge and open-ended movement into the future, especially when it comes to engagements with invention. From the dates on their covers on, serial print media were some of the great places where readers encountered their modernity. Indeed, they were some of the media that over the course of the century helped to recruit new readerships into a sense of that putative modernity and of its meaning. Of course, it's also right and necessary to be very suspicious of that experience and of modernity's self-congratulatory or melancholy sense of a break from the past, as well as its triumphalist exclusionary visions of the future. We could think of the ways that the idea of modernity went along with the denial of coeval status to cultures and peoples that inhabited the very same chronological timeframes. We could think of how modernity has mapped regimes of global domination and injustice and of planetary exploitation onto the timeline, so that resisting these supposedly becomes resisting time itself. My thoughts on the connections between seriality and modernity in the 19th century have been sharpened by Claire Pettit's Serial Forms, the unfinished project of modernity, 1815 to 48, a clear-eyed study published in 2020. So that's my little joke, clear-eyed 2020, which reads seriality far beyond the process of textual serialization and is itself a serial part of an ambitious three-book trilogy. Among many other things, Pettit emphasizes the work that apparently undistinguished and miscellaneous periodicals among an entire range of cultural forms could do in cultivating and expressing complexly serial relationships to time, knowledge, and identity. And my talk will bear out these claims, although in a much more limited kind of palette of expressions. But my central interest will be in how the serialization of technology and invention might give us a greater purchase on the histories of media, mediation, and modernity. I'm interested in how and where print culture makes places for new technologies, how treatments of technologies and technological progress are meaningfully entangled with the formats and mechanics of serial print, and how this entanglement helps produce a sense of modern life. I see this as dovetailing with a larger focus on how media become sites for creativity, yet also grounding conditions for knowledge and understanding, how our ideas so often come to take on the shapes of our media. Part of my interest is in how the media and the media ecologies of the past do not simply represent older versions of our own, yet may still help us read our situation. In fact, I will argue that courtesy of the work of serial mediation, 19th century media may look back at us at times perhaps critically, and at times very closely indeed. We know that from the middle to the end of the century, one of the great trends in Victorian print culture is the appearance of specialized periodicals for scientific research, for technical fields, for professions and institutions, publications that by their nature also mapped the progress of invention onto serial modernity. But today, I'm interested in writing that didn't have that kind of specialized technical address, writing that fit instances of innovation into the mosaic forms that mediated a wider but more miscellaneous sense of the world. Still, my main examples will be drawn from publications with different conceptions, formats, prices, readerships, 2 weeklies from the first half of the century, monthly from the second, publications of general interest, but with divergent arcs, editorial outlooks, histories, and cover prices. It's no accident that my examples here are all metropolitan publications, addressing a readership that is explicitly not defined by locality, occupation, religion, politics, gender, and so on. So this is kind of a counterpoint or a complement to Andrew's talk. Obviously, publication frequency, length, format, these carry practical implications, generic and sociological meanings. In their times and milieus, these all help position these three journals in the wide space between, say, the weighty pronouncements of old-fashioned book-like quarterlies and a metropolitan daily newspaper's commitment to the events of the day. And of course, there are reasons for not covering the news in the first half of the century because of the taxes on knowledge. So rather than the news, I'll be talking about the novelties. These examples will also afford 3 different instances of periodicals assimilating technomodernity to the mechanics of serial print representation, 3 ways that the most basic elements of serial publication, typography, periodicity, regular departments or columns, can turn into means representing the serial nature of technological modernity. There are also, to be honest, 3 pearls in Michael Wolff's sense, pearls in the golden stream, that I came across in other contexts and marked down as save for RSVP. In this case, going several years back. So in the first example, I hope to demonstrate how periodical writing could produce vernacular media theory and how the representation of a particular new medium calls on the affordances of print. And the second, how the supposed technological annihilation of space and time offers a way to consider how seriality works in time. In the final example, how the march of technological progress can bring together seriality with a form of information to make technomodernity routine and even slightly ridiculous. Okay, section 1, London, or maybe London. Thanks to its ubiquity, cultural centrality, archival longevity, Victorian print culture is the great site where we can go to see how the era made sense of its new technologies. In the pages of periodicals, we might watch this dynamic unfold practically in real time as writers try to describe and puzzle out the latest technological marvel. The attempt to render the working of a different medium in printed writing is an exercise in intermediality, that is, the representation of one medium by means of another. Writing about a new media technology establishes relationships between writing and that other medium, often leads writers to articulate ideas about the comparative mechanics of communication, to articulate vernacular media theories, and treatments of new media technologies can be particularly heady and revealing when those technologies are new and not yet actually integrated into daily life. So the instance of this vernacular theory and of intermediality between periodical writing and a new medium I'd like to discuss is the appearance of the then new electric telegraph in the lead article from the issue of Chambers Edinburgh Journal for 25th of July, 1840. It's a nice Scottish connection. This early treatment of electric telegraphy in this two-penny journal is one of my favorites, but I'd never really thought much about its relationships to the medium and mechanics of its representation here. In a 1999 VPR article, Robert Skolnick describes Chambers Edinburgh Journal as quite possibly the most popular periodical in Britain, with a circulation that in the 1840s surpassed 80,000. As Skolnick notes, it was only by utilizing the latest technologies of print, including the steam press, stereotyping, paper-making machinery, that the journal was able to achieve this. With a rejection of illustrations and advertising, he writes, the proprietors, the Chambers brothers, bet the magazine on the power of the written word. As Skolnick shows, the journal at this time was particularly committed to a vision of the spread of literacy, inclusion, and progressive social change. While the journal was established in Edinburgh and emphasized its Scottish base, it soon began producing stereotype plates so that identical copies of each issue could also be printed in London and Dublin. As the proprietors set up their own modern print works, writers in the journal celebrated the moral power of the steam press. Aileen Fife and other scholars have pointed out that Chambers Edinburgh Journal paid notable attention to science for a general journal of the period. It would enshrine this focus in 1854 when it became Chambers Journal of Popular Literature, Science, and Art. So it's not surprising that the journal would be a good place for reading the putative alignment between social progress, science and technology, and this is dissemination of knowledge. Okay. As the column A Few Minutes from Home, the Electric Telegraph begins, the writer has traveled south and sets forth from Euston Station to visit a busy London full of meetings and public amusements. A record of what he saw may assist the cause of inclusion. As he says, it may perhaps serve to amuse a leisure hour of the class of readers who by circumstances are shut out from personally visiting the scenes of my inquiry, scenes in which he meets with gentlemen who are the friends of an advancing intelligence, that is, of the progress of knowledge. But we'll also see intelligence and knowledge moving ahead in another sense. For the great physicist and inventor Charles Wheatstone has invited the writer to King's College to view that very surprising result of human ingenuity operating on a mysterious principle in nature, the electric telegraph. If the reader pleases, he shall accompany me along the Strand to the lecture room for a demonstration. A dominant medium of teleparticipation, periodical print, meets an incipient one. The electric telegraph had been invented by Wheatstone and Samuel Cooke just a few years earlier, and this might have been many readers' most detailed introduction to it. The electric telegraph is a means of transmitting any piece of intelligence through the medium of wires to any assignable distance by night or by day in a moment of time. The wires don't move or they're in any way drawn, neither do they emit any sounds. Just to kind of explain like how it works. They lie perfectly still and quiescent, and transmission is affected simply by electric or galvanic influence passing along invisibly from one extremity to the other. It's well understood there must be few who are not acquainted with the instantaneous manner in which it acts. The only thing peculiar in the present matter is causing the shock to affect a movable object at the extremity of the wire and so produce a certain telegraphic sign. The production of signs by galvanic shocks may on this account be defined as the principle on which this new species of communication is made to act. So we could say that this is a treatment of modernity as shock. But also note how that shock promises to become both meaningful and routine, just a everyday series of shocks. As the writer explains, Wheatstone's device is set up so that turning the transmitting machine's capstan creates an electric impulse that moves along the miles of wire to reveal the appropriate letter instantly on the dials of a receiver in a case. There is a sympathy, as I may call it, he writes, between the letters in the case and the letters in the capstan. The writer is delighted and astonished, but still seeks the right terms for understanding exactly what kind of knowledge or what component of language flashes down the wire. The answer is a surprising bit of vernacular media theory. A lady turning the capstan with her finger brought into view the word London in the time it could take to be uttered letter by letter, although the idea had to travel through 4 miles of wire. Not simply 6 letters, but the idea of London flashes down the wire. Telegraphic discourse begins and ends with a carefully spelled out signifier, the expression of pure sympathy between its transmitter and receiver. Yet during its instantaneous electrical journey, the message travels as something more transcendent and elusive, as pure electric signified. Electricity itself was often treated as a material force so powerful and rarefied that it was like a transcendent spiritual force. And here we can see how this early treatment of electrical communication expresses the emerging idea of information, apparently a kind of transcendent essence that can circulate free of bodies and matter. But also notable here is the particular visual and quite material typographic rendering of the flight of the idea of London. Chambers' Edinburgh Journal is very text-oriented, as Skolnick says, without illustrations or even much typographic variety. Rather than using italics or small caps, say, to intermediate the journey of the telegraphic word London, the compositor has made the choice, it's unusual in the journal, unique in this issue, stretching out the word with spaces, presumably to indicate the pauses between the appearance of each letter, seriatim, and in uttering them individually, but also as a kind of visual pun that suggests just how far the word had to go. I feel as if my eyes also detect a little extra width in the stroke thickness of the letters. Compare the N's in London to the other lowercase nearby, but this might be an illusion just because those are set in isolation. To say it's a very typographically staid publication. In the columns of the journal, the letters come across intact, yet subtly altered. While electrical translation and movement turn a pattern of signs into an idea, the printed line literally in letters, stretches to make the word spread out and go farther using the affordances of an existing technology to represent the power of a new one. The word London summarizes the writer's trip, his audience's vicarious access to it in the amusement of a leisure hour, the sympathy between transmission and reception, the layered temporalities of telegraphy, speech, transcription, reading, serial publication. We could also say that these letters graphically express the march of technology and the serial logic in which each part has both an identity and a meaning that emerges from its sequence. Okay. 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Next, I want to take a glance at 2, or better 3, numbers, significant numbers, of the Literary Gazette and Journal of Belles Lettres, Arts and Sciences, an 8-penny weekly published in London beginning in 1817 and edited for most of its run by William Jordan. The Literary Gazette is probably best known for its power as a literary review and its role in channeling works to a somewhat wider range of readers. It published long extracts. But it also offers another place for thinking about the enmeshment of the progress of invention in the form and mechanics of seriality, and an example of how periodicals could take up the language and outlook of modern technological invention. These will also allow the Literary Gazette to support a sense of the future that is open-ended yet constrained, or better yet, a futurity rendered serial so that it arrives right on time. The annihilation of space and time is a standard phrase used first and most frequently by periodical writers to marvel at the speed of steamships beginning in the 1820s, then at railways in the 1840s, at electrical communication shortly after that. Time just gets into place, just gets serially killed. Now, spoiler alert, time and space weren't actually annihilated at all, obviously. But what technologies of rapid transport and communication revealed was how time and space are deeply intertwined. No matter what the mile marker says, you're closer to a place when you can get there in less time. That's why Americans always give directions in time instead of distance. Marx would put it more accurately, calling it the annihilation of space by time. As a 19th century truism, the annihilation of space and time will be familiar to many of us from Wolfgang Schivelbusch's classic study, The Railway Journey. But something like this formulation has a long afterlife in ideas such as David Harvey's time-space compression. We also had Harvey last night. The annihilation of space and time helps to produce facts or texts that quickly circulate far from their contexts, where they're supposed to be able to speak for themselves, knowledge that is independent of a knower or of local conditions of knowledge. That is, the annihilation of space and time produces information, that modern form that is one of the legacies of the 19th century. So I want to look at how the literary gazette can borrow the annihilation of space and time associated with speed, invention, emergent idea of information, and link it to the time-bound form of seriality. The first number that I want to look at is the first number of the journal, dated 25th January 1817. In the first sentence of a preliminary address to readers, the editor exults that in Britain, the cause of literature has suffered no wartime decline. We're in 1817. In the next sentence, the nation's preeminence in science, as well as commerce and arms, is acknowledged by a ruined Europe. There's a lot of schadenfreude, actually. Here and in the name of the journal, the word literature and its cognates still extend to include not merely imaginative or artistic works, but something closer to the idea of letters, of some of published writing. Scientific inventions and discoveries and improvements appear as separate entries in the middle of a preview of the journal's future contents, along with such items as critical analysis of new publications, English and foreign, sketches of society, manners and morals, review of British and foreign drama, including the Italian opera. Within this first issue, the invention or improvement category is represented primarily by a brief note on Henri Didot's advances in manufacturing type, appropriately enough. The preliminary address goes on to summarize the journal's general outline and utility. By communicating the earliest intelligence on all literary subjects, the Literary Gazette must prove of the greatest importance to men of letters, to those who are interested in the commerce of books or the encouragement of inventions, and proportionably so to the public at large, as exhibiting a clear and instructive picture of the moral and literary improvement of the times, forming at the end of each year a complete and authentic chronological literary register for general reference. Looking to the prospects of this new journal, the writer somewhat hyperbolically imagines a kind of future anterior in which yet to be written issues fill out the outlines given here. The journal will not only disseminate the improvements of the day, but having performed this timely communication, its collected volumes will come to offer an archive of this yet to be achieved progress. The archive will be authentic because recorded as that progress unfolds in serial time and complete within the longer serial transit of each year. Here's another vernacular theory of a new medium, the journal, positing how the hypothetical, the unwritten journal, the future improvement, and the time-bound, a momentary sense of improvement of the week's issue of the journal become part of a permanent but still open-ended whole, a larger narrative. So the next issue that I want to look at is an issue that was published more than 2 decades later, the issue of the Literary Gazette for the 12th of September, 1840, just a few months after Chambers' Edinburgh Journal serialized telegraphy and printed the telegraphic idea of London. So in contrast to the Literary Gazette's inaugural issue, the only thing that is special about this number of the journal is its number. It is issue number 1234, 1234. This is not an anniversary tied to a calendar, but the production of an attractive series of digits by nothing more than the sequence of an issue count, which gives each issue both a particular identity and a place in the journal's serial sequence, a kind of medium-specific complement or stand-in for the date. The arithmetic figure of the number offers an idea, a name, and a synecdoche for the issue itself, the number, while giving its place in an orderly serial sequence. This is a curious number for a periodical above a daily issue. So at this point in the journal's run, its lead article is usually its review of new books, one of the Literary Gazette's signature features. But for this issue, the journal displaces the usual reviews by a column or so in order to make room for a kind of self-review, a lighthearted address that reflects on this arbitrary milestone, presumably by William Jordan. It begins by copying number 1234 from its paratextual position just below the masthead, where it might pass unnoticed by readers who actually just like want to read the journal, and promoting it into a column head so that it becomes available for comment. It's a curious number for a periodical. 1234. 1 is a nervous number. By the time of 1, 2, alias 12, we're getting firm in the saddle, like a jockey whose start is so good he feels pretty sure of running a fair winning race, looking complacently about at the public, a little more at our ease. By the date of 1, 2, 3, alias 123, there's nothing but liveliness and vitality. We are in full force, swinging away like giants refreshed and fancying that there will never be an end to our vigorous course. 1, 2, 3, 4, alias 1234, we ought to be steadiers. We are older, wisers. We are more experienced, and not the less hopeful and healthful, though a few years have passed over our heads. The occasion or non-occasion inspires a quick look back to issue number 1, which just encountered, did a name check of 12 a few months later, 123, and so on. And now there's the present number 1,234, at the distance of 320 years, has seen many striking changes, observed thousands and tens of thousands of novelties in literature and the arts, mighty improvements in the sciences, prodigious alterations in everything. Still, we are well satisfied, so well that we begin to look forward to our next figure. We mean number 12,345. I begin to look forward to that too. We trust our readers will all abide with us till then, winks the writer. So 12,345 is the third number of the Literary Gazette I want to consider. The writer calculates that that issue is on schedule to arrive somewhere about the middle of the year 2054. Now, I believe that it would actually be expected to appear on the 23rd of August, 2053. But who's counting? In any case, back in 1840, a glance 214 years in the future also provokes a reciprocal one 214 years in the past, when King James I had just died and there was no Literary Gazette at all. Might such a fate also lie 2 centuries ahead? Who knows? Perhaps by the year 2054, Paternoster Row may be a railroad with St. Paul's as a booking place, and on the site of the Literary Gazette's office near Waterloo Bridge, supposing the Thames not to have been drained, a balloon station. And I kind of, that would be pretty cool, actually. Will anyone be reading the Literary Gazette then? Yes? Maybe. Us. Perhaps some antiquary, fond of old trifles, may fall in with this page and illustrate it with notes in some little red repository. VPR. Or even, wondering at his discovery, print an essay on the subject. I feel seen. We thank him now, a priori, continues the writer, and we beg to inform him, and through him the posterity that shall succeed the 8 or 9 generations which have passed between us, that is the people of 1840, and he's looking now even beyond our RSVP member of 2054, that we wrote this paper after dinner on the eve of departure for Glasgow in Scotland, where there was about to be assembled a congregation of persons who have met annually for the past 9 years under the title of the British Association for the Advancement of Science. What time is it? 1626, 1817, 1840, 2054, later than that. The editor admits that his ideas are confused and rambling, as miscellaneous, we could say, as an early Victorian miscellany periodical, a medley of objects and persons, geographies and temporalities. He thinks of the electric telegraph and the indomitable Wheatstone, his trip to Scotland, James Ross's expedition to the Antarctic then in progress, the glories of the Highlands, the hospitalities of Glasgow, the triumphs of Scottish manufacturing, the Clyde and the Thomas, united by a few hours of magic transport in the noblest of steamers, the annihilation of space and time. But if space and time were annihilated, what is the use of our troubling to tell these things to our antiquarian friend of 2054? After all, the editor concludes, this future reader will be as well acquainted with all this as the editor himself, thanks to the Literary Gazette, which has fulfilled just the task of authentic but cumulative information making that the journal's first issue envisioned in 1817. An eye-catching but arbitrary journal number has inspired a look ahead to an arbitrary point in the future. In this jokey vision of the journal's unlimited sequential growth, the journal functions as a time machine, because whether or not the Literary Gazette has actually reached issue 12,345, number 1,234 still exists, part of an ever-accumulating print record. This status allows it to be read and rediscovered, a serial part of a permanent renaissance that has become taken for granted. The popular journal of 1840 lives on in the repository of 2054. Chivalbush connects the annihilation of space and time to the experience of technomodernity, excitement, shock, terror, and a look towards a distant world in which St. Paul's is a ticket office and the Thames runs dry offers the sublimity of a deep time in which the editor, the contemporary readers of the Literary Gazette, and even the periodical researcher of the 21st century will be no more. But seriality itself domesticates these shocks, mediating the futures to make it routine. As it found ways to represent the electric telegraph in telegraphic language in its journalistic and typographic vocabularies, Chambers' Edinburgh Journal suggests the excitement and inventiveness needed to come up with terms for a new technology. But the Literary Gazette shows how serial mediation could make a look into the future seem both exciting and fully expected. Within just a few decades, the production of the latest marvelous invention could come to seem like a mundane aspect of everyday life, just part of what it meant to be modern. This happens as print media do not simply respond to one new technology or the next, but parade the march of invention itself as a serial aspect of contemporary life. This is the final part of my talk. Gatherings. So finally, I want to examine the serial presentation of technological innovation decades later in probably a less distinguished forum, Cassell's Family Magazine. Andrew has taught us, has insisted that you can learn a lot from mediocrity. And a number of levels, that's my goal with this talk. But Cassell's Family Magazine may be an example of this. The monthly magazine begins the weekly Cassell's Illustrated Family Paper in 1853, founded by the temperance reformer, coffee merchant, and entrepreneur John Cassell, becoming Cassell's Magazine, 1867, and Cassell's Family Magazine in 1874, before returning to the titles Cassell's Magazine, 1897, and eventually leading a post-Victorian life as a magazine of fiction, which had always been one of its emphases, at least for a long time. So the particular place for serial modernity I want to highlight in its pages arrives with the 1874 relaunch, its relaunch as Cassell's Family Magazine. It is now felt that in order to keep pace with the growing demands of practical usefulness, the time has arrived when it is due to the readers of this magazine to add fresh features, chiefly of domestic interest, to its pages, announced the journal on the last page of its previous version. So important has the introduction of these domestic features been felt to be that it has been decided to publish the magazine in future under the title of Cassell's Family Magazine, which will personally address every member of the family, father, mother, son, and daughter. The family itself here appears as a collective readership that is still individually addressable by generation and gender. To extend its range over such useful and entertaining subjects as are calculated to make it indispensable to every home, the magazine will recommit itself to publishing both serial and self-contained works of fiction, stories of travel, adventure, everyday life, with illustrations now to be more profusely interspersed among its pages. But one of the signature innovations of this relaunch might seem to have only a tenuous relationship to the explicit orientation around the use and entertainment of the Victorian nuclear family. Another new valuable feature will be introduced into this magazine under the title of The Gatherer. This will embrace gatherings of a pithy character, literary, scientific, social, and humorous, the cream, that is to say, of all that is new in the social and scientific world, with entertaining notes upon the remarkable facts so continually being brought into public notice. So the gatherings here will be juxtapositions of material brought from elsewhere, intentionally assembled in the time-bound form of a magazine section. I could locate this department of the magazine between, say, the kind of miscellaneous articles long found in general interest journals, like Household Words or All the Year Round or something, and the scrappy format of later periodicals like Tidbits and Answers. As the magazine's relaunch commences, The Gatherer offers a brief miscellany of disconnected factoids, observations, and acrostics and puzzles as one of the attractions of every issue. Typically, each of the subheaded lexia in the section, each gathered item, is only the length of a long paragraph or maybe a single column of a double column page. The act of collection, of gathering, elevates these morselized units of light knowledge from what could have been filler to feature, a principle that obviously anticipates Tippett's and Company. It is estimated that no less than 50 million pins are manufactured daily in England and Ireland, 37 million of which are made in Birmingham. Okay, well, all right then. So in the first few volumes of the relaunched Castles Family magazine, items about new inventions are one of the regular components of The Gatherer. Here's one from 1875, the better mousetrap as adjunct and icon of 19th century civilization. I feel as if there's a kind of stadial theory of mousetrap history somewhere here. But just a few more years into its run, such items dominated. A full roster of gatherings from the Section 1 1881 issue includes an improved rail car, a surgical machine, an electric lamplighter, a new safety lamp, a simple mole trap, branching out a little bit, a registering stamp, a discovery in shipbuilding, a simple balance, a steam catamaran, a fire dam consumer, belt lowering gear, gas from castor oil, caution about toy pistols, a chimneyless lamp, a solar watch, a naphtha locomotive, an electric balloon, a new machine, hearing plants grow. The natural history trivia dwindles, the acrostics are gone. The Gatherer has now effectively become the magazine's department of invention. 18 new inventions or applications of science, interspersed with a warning to parents about how mischievous boys can hurt themselves while playing with dangerous toy guns. The only explicit nod among this issue's gatherings to the journal's domestic mission. Still, it's all in line with the journal's vague vision of family-friendly uplift. In 1885, The Gatherer gains the title An Illustrated Record of Invention and Discovery, with similar variations to follow. But these editions really just spell out what's already the case. Issues now include a note to its readers who want further particulars about an article from The Gatherer, technophilic mouse catchers or mole catchers, perhaps. When the section gains its new subtitle, the note also addresses inventors who may wish to submit samples of their new inventions, although it's strange to think of the inventors of automated scarecrows, aluminium cartes de visite, or eyeglasses made for horses, actually rushing to send their latest creations to Castle's Family magazine. What will they think of next? The Gatherer rounds up the supposed innovations of the day via thumbnail descriptions and plenty of eye-catching illustrations, one of the magazine's traditional strengths. These items are new without quite being news, a routinized stimulus to curiosity and mild wonder. So many technologies that are new and apparently not yet integrated into daily practices, gatherings from a limitless zone of serial innovation. A selection of the heterogeneous, excited pieces in The Gatherer has already furnished materials for a non-scholarly but very interested in well-researched book, Carolyn Rochford's 2014 Great Victorian Inventions, Novel Contrivances and Industrial Revolutions. Not all of the inventions paraded in The Gatherer are by any means amusing or absurd. Just among Rochford's regatherings, we can find the first wind turbine from generating electricity, made in Scotland, as well as the Maxim gun. So I'm less interested in The Gatherer's specific content of inventions, although this content really is distractingly interesting, than in its format, rhetoric, and presentation, how text, illustrations, and framing contribute to the creation of a popular vocabulary for visualizing technomodernity. The Gatherer offers a verbal and visual toolkit for understanding the steady monthly march of technomodernity as textual and technical, piecemeal, a jumble of curiosities, the product of individualized efforts. Technological innovation merits our mild interest, for it is mundane, uncontroversial, quasi-spontaneous, progressive, but unchallenging, not a matter, for instance, of planning, group interests, policies, social effects. This is a reduced context zone of futurity as information, where technological progress marches autonomously from month to month, a view from nowhere, of facts from nowhere that speak for themselves. And if these facts don't speak for themselves, they don't speak at all. The details of a new and ingenious topographical device for making informal land surveys are too technical to be given here, and our object is chiefly to bring the instrument under the notice of the reader. The name The Gatherer suggests a harvest of what is naturally fruited or bloomed. We might think of the word anthology, a gathering of flowers, but also of the printer's gatherings of cut pages, or even of the magazine's conservative visions of the whole family gathered around it, which, as periodicals researchers have argued, hampered the journal's ability to keep up with more successful competitors by the 1890s. Whenever they published a great grown-up work of fiction, they get kind of freaked out, and so we're never going to let that happen again. It is perhaps not surprising that with its disjunctive miscellaneous format and its orientation towards light curiosity, The Gatherer would eventually end up calling for reader-supplied stories and images, just the kinds of elements that let publications such as Tidbits and Answers cultivate the sense of a participatory culture of serial print. By 1896, there's an entirely new scheme of competitions, with prizes not only for serial stories and photographs, but also for gentlemen's collars and needlework handkerchiefs. The prizes, a few months later, the prizes for the best stitched gentleman's linen pocket handkerchief, and handkerchiefs that were not made of linen were excluded. Sorry, a lot of people tried, but so the best linen handkerchiefs would be shortly announced alongside Wilhelm Röntgen's invention of X-ray photography. A few years later, The Gatherer has become a column called Something New, a kind of reductio of its principle of disjunctive light novelty, with items of science, invention, and commerce that are even more factoid-like, often only a sentence or two in length, and never more than a single paragraph. It really resembles the mocking style guide that George Gissing provides for the Tidbits-like journal Chit Chat in New Grub Street. A few years later, and this material comes to occupy a handful of pages at the end of each issue, called Flotsam and Jetsam. From feature back to filler. Perhaps technology and modernity could be too safe, routine, disjunct, and unspectacular. So I've argued that in the nexus of print seriality and technology, 19th century periodicals produce and disseminate a sense of serial modernity, of a forward march of resistless movement into a future that is invented somewhere by someone, maybe Charles Wheatstone. That these periodicals draw on their affordances to mediate technomodernity itself. Still, the interplay between serial media and technological modernity probably did not stretch out the run of Chambers' Edinburgh Journal, did not help the Literary Gazette reach issue 12,354, alas, did not allow Cassell's magazine to triumph over newer and more successful competitors. What's more, the forms of information and virtual participation here just might hint at the possibilities of a kind of dialectical reversal or McLuhan-like flip in which a putative rejection of mediation coincides with dissatisfaction with or the supersession of serial modernity itself. So here's what I mean. In her book, Immediacy, or the Style of Too Late Capitalism, published earlier this year, so there's my immediacy, Anna Kornbluh argues that one of the signal developments in our contemporary culture and media has been a rejection of mediation in favor of supposedly more direct experience and expression that supposedly is important. Social media versus legacy media, autofiction and memoir events, memoir versus the novel, the nows versus the news. In addition to her achievements as a theorist of contemporary culture, of course, Kornblue is also an accomplished Victorianist. In Kornblue's account, the supposed disintermediation promised by streaming video, immersive experience, or OnlyFans, and actually OnlyFans is my example, not hers, coincides not only with algorithmic tracking or customization of content in the service of a frictionless user experience, but also with a loss of futurity. Immediacy becomes the characteristic style in her account of a world of apparently intractable global inequality, unstoppable ecocide, world-class pandemics, nuclear proliferation, AI, and widespread apparent stuckness in those problems. Undoubtedly, there are elements of 19th century culture, including periodical culture, that themselves help plant the seeds for later fantasies of immediacy and disintermediation. But amid the routine decay of internet links, amid depublished content, vanished digital platforms, deleted streaming movies and television, amid cyber attacks on our great libraries, the mediated cumulative model of culture that aligned with serial print presents at least a genuine contrast. I salute the RSVP for their plans to make this talk available on YouTube, but I'll be saving a few hard copies for my repository and any future antiquarians, just in case. Our ideas so often come to take on the shapes not only of our media, but also perhaps of our media archives. We could juxtapose the archive of the Literary Gazette, indeed the archive of 19th century periodicals, or why not? How about the entire archive of print itself, with the accumulation of globally 328.77 million terabytes of digital data every day by the beginning of 2024, a process that apparently, supposedly, continues to increase so exponentially that in fact, 90% of existing data was created in the last 2 years alone. And they weren't even such good years, right? Along with their occasional glances at the 21st century antiquaries reading over their shoulders, this contrast of scale and organization may be another way that the Victorians, with their serial modernity, look back at us. Thanks very much.
Richard, thank you for such a rich and delightful talk. We have time for just a couple of questions, so I quickly will run the mic to whoever would like to ask the first. Jim.
What a treat that was. I'm still thinking about all kinds of things, but one thing that struck me was in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 section, my favorite section. And I was thinking about the way in which you presented so wonderfully the way the Literary Gazette anticipated retrospective reading in that first issue, and then in 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. And yet, looking at the accumulation of issues in the issue number, I looked on the right-hand side and noticed there was no volume number. So the journal itself didn't seem to be formally enacting the possibility of retrospective reading that it was textually writing about. Yeah. And I think a lot about indexes, and I wonder if it's indexed at all. But it was really that absence of the volume form of the Literary Gazette, which seems so interesting.
No, I mean, I think that's true. And I mean, when you contrast it to so many journals that come sort of pre-processed for their future lives in volumes and in the repository, I almost feel like the assumption that, of course, this is going to end up in a repository, even if we do nothing to facilitate that, kind of makes it more powerful, right? That just by virtue of printing it off, distributing it, selling it, having a serial number on it, it's just going to kind of match. And they were right, right? But you're right that unlike so many journals and often journals that were maybe often a bit more serious, but like, Castle's Family Magazine, has the index and the whole sort of equipment. It doesn't even seem to make that archiving process very easy. It just assumes that of course it's going to happen. Yeah, no, but you're absolutely right about that.
Right there. Thank you so much for that talk. My question is kind of riffing off of this slide because I wanted to ask, this is after serial modernity, I wanted to ask about before serial modernity, and because I was thinking about and interested in how you're thinking about, or how what your archives have to tell you about the people who are kind of left out of serial modernity, right? Or people who are only present in kind of periodical serial modernity as objects rather than subjects, colonial subjects, indigenous people, provincial people.
Right. I mean, that's a great point. I mean, I have to say that just in my own work, which does feature a lot of telegraphs, I mean, I've thought most about that with regard to electricity. That we have this sort of warm, sedate vision of going to Wheatstone's lab and seeing a lady sort of using the dial and the correct letter appearing. And this is in contrast, especially as the telegraphs did get installed, with all kinds of stories about rustics wanting to send packages on the telegraph, or African Americans being shocked by electricity. So as well as functioning as a kind of as a vehicle for the imagination of like rapid communication by a kind of highly literate metropolitan elite, the telegraph specifically, since the case I'm most familiar with, certainly functioned as also a marker of exclusion, and that kind of exclusion continues in various ways. Late in the century, where the people become very concerned about having a global empire that is connected by a telegraph network that goes anywhere that's not on imperial soil. And so this involves this huge project to build an all red line of telegraphy, but also it drives imperialism, so that there's an atoll in the middle of the Pacific Ocean that's only claimed by the British because they need a way station for the telegraph network right there. So even something like the telegraph, which we saw in Chambers, could be a kind of a marker of modernity and of unmodernity. And if you're not modern, you're going to be excluded from this network. You're going to be shocked, and no, you cannot transmit your sauerkraut, right? Along the, and one of the famous examples, along the telegraph. So you're absolutely right.
Thanks very much.
This goes a lot actually for the AGM. So please join me in thanking the one. Once you got the sauerkraut in, that was it.
You can't call that. You must not be hungry.
Exactly. We just got up and
That looks like